So my name is Nick Goodker, otherwise known as Not So Quiet Luxury. I'm based in London, so from the UK. Have been talking about fashion over the years, actually, for about the last 10 years or so. However, only got back into actually doing that sort of in a public way, probably over the last just over a year.
So why did you create the account?
So it was actually originally my regular account, and I was talking about politics and music and all sorts of things on there. It became a little bit frustrating to talk about that sort of stuff on there, and so I thought a change of name would be ideal because sometimes it just doesn't sort of catch on. I guess if it's your own name, maybe. And so I thought, well, I need to kind of think of something and how best to do it. And yeah, I always thought, well, I can talk about fashion. It's one of the sort of subjects that I can talk about, I feel. But I didn't really want to talk about fashion in a way. I wanted to talk about other things, but sort of dress them as fashion and almost sort of manipulate how I go about things. So yeah, I kind of decided over the last probably 18 months that I wanted to do it in one way or another. And because I have a full-time job in healthcare, this kind of felt like the best way to start doing it.
So what do you do in healthcare?
So I have a master's degree in pharmacy, actually. So
Okay.
I deal with patients, young and old, just medications basically.
Yeah.
So I deal with kind of patients in the community, care home patients, that sort of thing. So it's a good um, almost 60-hour a week job,
Wow.
which I'm finding actually now that I'm doing this, it's sort of like I feel like I almost have two 60-hour jobs,
Yeah.
except one pays me and one definitely doesn't pay me. So yeah. so,
My
so
gosh.
yeah, 120 hours, but one's carrying one load and the other carried the other load. Yeah.
So how did you get involved with fashion? Because clearly your professional route is something completely different. Like, how did you
Yeah.
learn everything that you know?
So, so long story short, about 10, 12 years ago, I was editor at my university for the university newspaper. And I used to talk about film and music mainly, but with a sort of a sprinkling of fashion,
Mhm.
but mainly the focus was on film. And at that time, I was graduating, became a little bit unwell, which was the bad thing. But the good side of that was I had a bit of free time while I was unwell, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
So I just started to blog. And yeah, as I say, I was talking about film and music, but fashion as well. And I would, at that time, so this is talking the late 2000s, early 20s. At that time, because you didn't have sort of really Instagram or anything like that, I was just kind of reaching out directly to photographers who I was seeing sort of through the blog sphere. So whether that was like sort of early Pinterest or MySpace or whatever it was, just kind of just trying to find people who kind of had a street vision of taking photos of like street style and that sort of thing. And that, it could just be not just sort of like street fashion, but also sort of high end fashion as well, but mainly street focused. So I'd reach out to these people and they would, I was a small time blogger, so they would happily send me pictures for me to kind of talk about them online and that sort of thing. And that's where it started. And at the same time, I was working, I did a short stint in Paris working in perfumery. And that came kind of so I used to work for L'Oreal Paris while I was studying pharmacy. So it's kind of a little bit of a mix of things. So I was doing pharmacy and then I had an internship that I kind of randomly got, even though I was the only person who kind of did nothing sort of similar to what L'Oreal Paris were doing at the time. But that's how I got the ball moving in terms of kind of, I guess, generally that field. And then, as I say, doing the blogging and kind of working in Paris kind of got me a little bit interested in it. And then a whole 10 years passed and then I came back to this.
Yeah.
But I
It's
had
like
that background in the first place.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of
Yeah.
like going back to the roots, You're like, you know what? I'm just gonna bring the blog to the format that is like social media essentially and like current events.
Yeah. Well, I think at the time, so when I changed my name on Instagram, and again, it makes it sound like it was years ago, but it was just last year. But when I changed my name on Instagram, the whole point was that I wanted to make 1 minute vids, 1 minute reels specifically. So I didn't want to do anything that was sort of, it was going to be mainly green screen because I knew depending on the time that I had available, that green screen would be the best option for me. Short 1 minute to 1 minute and a half reels on all sorts of topics, but I wanted to make sure that they kind of felt like a journal to me. So they weren't really made. Well, it blew up quite quickly, but they weren't made for other people really. I
Mhm.
always thought I'll make them to look back on, and that can kind of tell me where I was in my headspace at that time.
Oh,
I
cool.
thought it'd be like a creative way of kind of like, okay, so that's how you feel. What is the sort of the meta text behind what you're creating here? And I could look back on it in years' time.
Yeah.
And that obviously got out of my hands really quickly.
Yeah.
So it kind of became a journal, not just for me, but for like many people actually, in fact. But yeah, that was the aim of the Instagram profile anyway.
I love that. I mean, there's something like kind of beautiful about like, oh, I'm doing this for myself and then like other people like it, you know? You're like, well, that's great.
Yeah, I think definitely this at the start, of course, like we'll discuss it, but as things evolve, there's a different sort of I guess there's a pressure you put on yourself, and there's an external pressure as you build, and people have different expectations from you, and you have different expectations from yourself in terms of what you're putting out there. But for sure, at the start, it's great because it's you are free because you're not beholden to anyone or any specific requests or anything like that. It's just okay, I'll talk about whatever I want to talk about, and I don't care really if anyone watches it or not. I mean, ideally, some people watch it, but I didn't have any sort of metrics or thresholds that I was trying to aim for specifically.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of like ties into like you being like authentic and like choosing things that, maybe strike a chord in the moment. Is that kind of how you choose to talk about things? Like, is it just like totally your process and what you're experiencing?
Well, when I started to, so my first vids were the haute couture week. I think it was fall winter 24. I think it was.
Okay.
That was my first vid. So I didn't want to sort of come in cold just with an opinion, right? Like
Yeah.
this is how I feel about Anna
Yeah.
Wintour, or whatever it is. Right? So I wanted to have some sort of framework at the start just to kind of so I could get to grips with the technology that I was using. And even then, I still use the same tech now. I just haven't had a chance to kind of explore those things. But just so I could get comfortable in front of a camera, really, and have something that almost felt like not a home run, but I knew that the audience that I had at the start. So when I started doing it, I think I had about 200 followers or something like that last year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was just pretty much just friends and family. So in that sense, I knew that whatever I said would always just come across as something interesting for ideally most of those people.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the starting point. So I didn't have a plan of, I guess, what I wanted to talk about. I just kind of made sure I started when I knew there was stuff going on.
Yeah.
Because I think if I started this time last year and you're sort of like, okay, we've got the Met Gala coming up, but this whole period between the Fashion Week month and this event in the next couple of days,
Yeah.
then you'd almost be scrambling when there's not much attention.
Yeah. No,
So
for sure.
I definitely wanted to start when I knew there was something going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, also, it's kind of like writing the algorithm, like obviously next week or tomorrow, the Met Gala is going to be like crazy. So everyone's talking about it, it's like
Yeah.
trending. And fashion, fortunately, always has events and, fashion weeks and everything going on where there's like moments or magazines. So there's like a lot to talk about kind of
Yeah.
in between fashion weeks, which is like, helpful for someone like you, and there's like cultural
Yeah, I mean,
things going
having
on.
done this for a year, it's strange because there's a lot to talk about, but there's actually, in a way, not a lot to talk about as well.
Hmm.
Because I spoke about it on my story on Instagram yesterday. There is a sort of a temptation. This is sort of the cashing in your chips part for fashion commentators because
Mhm.
it's so easy, right? We could all talk about the best dressed in the next day, the worst dressed, did the theme, well, all these things that we could talk about, all the gossipy stuff that we want to talk about. There's so
Totally.
many angles you can go at it, and really, it's sort of free money in a way because someone will watch it and people will engage with it because it crosses a little bit into the mainstream in a way that if you're talking about sort of I don't know, Rick Owens or something,
Yeah.
it might not necessarily go to the mainstream. So I feel like actually some of these sort of bellwether moments throughout the year are actually for most fashion content creators, they're kind of like the bread and butter
Mhm.
because like you can pump out stuff so easily, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, it's like, if you're talking about a celebrity like Kim Kardashian or something, that's
Yeah.
gonna hit way more than like, yeah, like maybe Rick Owens or maybe even something more
Yeah.
niche than that. But
Yeah, and I think all of us as well are, and I mean I'm definitely a part of this, but all of us are sort of a little bit of weight because we have access to about 5% of what the Met Gala is, which is just the red carpet, green carpet, blue carpet, whatever the. So
yeah,
that's all we have. We don't see anything else, right? So everything that we're being fed and that we have to sort of digest and kind of process is based on that. So you're almost begging for something to go wrong or something to not look, because it's like, what am I supposed to talk about otherwise?
yeah,
Right. And it's like, and it's very juicy because of this whole sort of black dandyism kind of theme.
Mhm.
where you kind of just, especially someone who kind of comes from a minority background as myself, I'm a little bit left as sort of, okay, where, what are going to be my entry points here? Because
Yeah.
there are certain things that, I guess, so this takes it back to when I started. Actually, one of the things I did think about when I started to do this was like you said, who's the audience, right?
Mhm.
And I did think to myself, okay, currently, if I look at the landscape of the people who are doing well on social media, so when I look at well, I mean views,
Mhm.
followers, engagement, all of that, not just one, but maybe, parts of those things. And it always felt like it was kind of one demographic mainly that was doing it and was getting the engagement.
Yeah.
And I actually thought, well, I don't think there's someone like me who does it in the first place. And that doesn't mean to say I thought I had something interesting to say, but I thought, well, I definitely don't look the certain way, and I don't speak a certain way, and my kind of general orientation is not a certain way. And so maybe, even though that might not allow me to say certain things, it give me a certain leeway for things, but it might challenge me to kind of present something in a different way that maybe a lot of the audience hasn't seen. Um, so that was kind of really interesting for me at the start, without
Yeah.
going off on a tangent and kind of getting confused. But yeah,
No, it's great. I mean, it's helpful to like see because there's always like people doing something that, 4 or 5 people are doing, let's say. And then you're like, oh,
yeah.
should I join in the mix? But then you like have to realize like your point of view is different, and like there is like value in like adding to the conversation, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
people don't even try sometimes because they just get intimidated by like, the party that's already started without them. So
Yeah.
definitely, like, something to know before getting into it, like, yeah, who's the audience? Who's gonna see my point of view, like, as valuable or, like, interesting? And, I think there's, like, so many different ways you can go about it, but,
Yeah.
I
And I
love
think a
that
part
you're like, "Imma do it."
Yeah, and I think a part of the point of view was also that I wanted to kind of almost take a lot of that spirit that I find is in the Discords, for example, or the Reddits, or even that you'd have in sort of lounge conversation. Now, I don't have that in my general conversation because I work in healthcare. So that is not generally part of my life where people are sitting around talking about Jonathan Anderson. But in those sort of specific situations,
Yeah.
right, you see the fieriness, and a lot of it to me felt like, okay, what I can do that I think both of these parties can't do. So the Discord groups and the guys who are sort of like making a living out of this, and therefore they have to speak a certain way, and they have to play the game a little bit. Is
Mhm.
I can find a balance of kind of not trying to burn all my bridges at the same time,
Mhm.
whilst not being sort of, okay, I'm going to take the first promo that I get coming through, and you know what I mean, all those sort of things, all those sort of loops that you get as you get bigger, sort of thing, right? All the freebies or whatever it is and all that sort of stuff. And so that was kind of, so even though visually I felt I was bringing something different, it was also sort of taking that as well, right? Taking those sort of taking those chats and sort of thinking, oh, okay, maybe I can bring some of that in here. And I
Yeah.
don't know why those people are not doing it. And maybe it's just they don't have the confidence, or they don't want to put themselves in front of a screen, or different reasons, right? Or they might just not. They might just have a black and white filter, right? They might not be able to do the grey.
Yeah.
Um, but I always thought, well, if I can do the grey, then
Mhm.
I can bring both of those together, and that's quite a cool thing. I thought that's quite a fun thing to be able to do.
Yeah, because I mean, I remember seeing you mention that, like, people think that you're, like, more critical than, like, other people. Like, how does that kinda come into play with all this? Do you think you are?
I don't know. I think because because I use fashion, and I try to use what's relevant, because I know if I can use a situation that's timely and that's happening in the moment, then I know that the engagement almost will kind of naturally be there. Even
Mhm.
though I've kind of hoodwinked people into why why they're watching the reel, although
Yeah.
that's sort of changed in the last sort of 6 months, but that's a different kind of thing. I'll talk about that sort of a little bit differently. So I think the critical thing, if I was to look through my reels, and I think I've only done about 150, I think, maybe something like that. Um, I don't know how often I'm actually critical about the same thing over and over again. I think I find most people, unless you follow me, most people will probably just see the one reel and see the criticism I mean, a lot of the time my criticisms are really focused, actually. So
Mhm.
if I have a criticism, let's say we're talking about Balenciaga and Demna. Now, everyone can talk about Balenciaga and Demna, right? It's just so easy to talk about. You could talk about, oh yeah, the Adidas campaign and all this. It's like 3 years, 4 years ago now, right? You can keep
Yeah.
rehashing the same stuff. But I always found that throughout my reels. So if I've spoken about Balenciaga 4 or 5 times, I don't think I've been critical about the same thing over and over again. And
Mhm.
I've always tried to kind of have the balance of the specific moments where I think whatever the designer, whatever the artist, whatever the creator had in mind, whatever they were trying to kind of present across to us,
Mhm.
I always try to find those moments where they succeeded in it. And
Yeah.
what I try not to do is try to second guess the creator and say, actually, no, they're not doing this for this reason. They're doing it for cynical reasons. I try not to do that.
Yeah.
So actually, the criticism's more about the execution of the idea
Mhm.
rather than the sort of the mindset of the idea. Because I'm not. I think a lot of us, especially in social media, we try to. I don't know. I think this is what the world is like anyway. When it comes to politics, when it comes to me, when you're sort of defending your own turf, I guess there's no nuance to how you can have a discussion. And I knew that by doing 1 minute reels, I'm not going to be able to put across everything that I want to put across right in a minute. So you have to make it punchy. You have to kind of get a couple of things across. But yeah, that was my key. Of if anyone did say to me, "You're cynical all the time," and I mean, and then that comes as well. I mean, as you grow anyway, people will come at you,
Yeah.
and I've always encouraged that anyway
Yeah.
because I think that's just interesting anyway. I mean, there's one thing when it comes to abuse, I guess,
Yeah.
but I think, I don't know, even for me, I've always felt if someone could be sort of the top comment in my reel, and I'm just sort of waiting for the day where it has more likes than my reel itself,
Yeah.
because that's, I've always felt like that's something that I could learn from. But it never really happens like that. You do get the sort of this, you're cynical all the time, but I think those are people who are sort of passing by your account and they don't
Yeah.
necessarily see kind of what you do generally necessarily.
Mhm.
But also as well, I think we're in a moment as well where the general public doesn't really, clearly doesn't really care about luxury fashion. Like our views are down, the engagement's down, the buying is down, right? So it's
Mhm.
like, well, how many of us are going to be honest about why that is, right? And you can talk about this in so many different fields, right? Because you could talk about why does someone, I mean, we're people of the Instagram, of TikTok and all that, most of us are quite left leaning, right? It's not hard to say, hard to kind of think about, but we find it hard, and this is something that I've had to kind of question myself on. We find it really hard to kind of understand why someone who's not like us makes a decision that's not the same way as what we would make, right?
Mhm.
And I think as I was growing up through my teens, early 20s, I think I could have been quite sort of hyperbolic and sort of quite sort of reactionary, right? In the sense of, okay, why would you vote for this person when he or she is like this, that, and the other? And I think as I've gotten older, right, you kind of like, well, how well do you know that individual who's voted for like, not everyone's a racist, not everyone's, you know what I mean? And it's,
Yeah.
and so I think the internet has kind of, and the way people's minds are attuned now is just like, you're a cynic or you're a sycophant, right?
Yeah.
You're nothing in between, right? Um, you can't have that kind of discussion. Yeah, going back to it, I think compared to most of the guys who are doing well, and I'd put myself in that category of doing well, I
Mhm.
probably am more of the sort of like, so why was this decision made, rather than sort of like focusing on the sort of it looks good in the moment, or whatever. I guess it's not that I don't feel that way at times. It's just, it's not an interesting topic for me to discuss, I think what it is. So I could
Yeah.
always do that thing of, these are the 5 ways that Zendaya looked great, right? Because I
Yeah.
think Zendaya looks great a lot of the times, or Zendaya in Law and how they put things together. But I
Totally.
think people talk about that already. There's
Mhm.
enough discussion about those things already. So me just saying that and me agreeing with everyone else, I don't know what we're doing. We're just creating a club of people who just agree with each other,
Yeah, and that's
you
kind
know?
of like social media anyways. And I think it's every time even if I like agree or disagree, every time I watch your videos, I'm like fair. Like fair point. I'm never like, well, fuck that opinion, It's
Yeah.
always like, I mean, it's not often that I like disagree. Sometimes I'm more
Yeah.
like, well, wait, let me like I don't understand like the background behind this, so let me like look into it, and then it's like, oh, I could see why, because there's like
Yeah.
more to it than just like the image or whatever, you know? So I feel like, but I also think that's like kind of like the virality like score is like, is something a little controversial, like is something gonna spark
Yeah.
engagement. And I think like as people get out of this whole like, you know, like cancel culture, like you have to like agree with everyone, like kind of like
Yeah.
mindset of like, you know,
Yeah.
like the first, at least in America, like first Trump, like 2016 vibes, like there, I feel like the idea to have like more open discussion, like from different
Yeah.
people and different points of views is like really valuable, especially in fashion and on social media,
But I
you know?
think also as well, when you're react, I mean, there are times where I get to kind of write out my script a little bit and how I want to plan and how I want to say things, and it's again, it's very manicured. It's more manipulated because I know where the joke is going to be, right? And I know where the thing, and I want to say it I want it to seem as seamless as possible, and so
Yeah.
I know that that's something that I'm quite good at, as just kind of almost kind of doing it as if I'm just delivering it for the first time.
Yeah.
And most of the time it is, I'm just doing it, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the time, what I guess just people who are watching your stuff don't realize, and again, these are people who've not chosen to follow you and kind of
Mhm.
see what you've been doing for a while. It could just be you've woken up a certain way in the morning
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's your mindset, and it's not sort of like, well, you've woken up on the bad side, wrong side of the bed, and I need to go in on this person. It just means more that you just might just not be, you know what I mean, your mind's, you might just feel a bit slower that day, you might be a bit more sort of pensive that day. um and this is, I think this is what weighs heavy as you sort of scale up, I think. And it weighs heavy for me anyway, and I don't know if it does for for a lot of people who do this, I've got to be honest. But
I'll let you
for
know.
me, it does, because because I know that if I put something out, and especially now that I'm not doing necessarily my sort of 3 a week or something like that, right? I'm not trying to hit a number of what I put out.
Mhm.
It kind of just comes as it is. So now I know that if I put something out, and I know that at least a certain, at worst, a certain number of people will see it,
Mhm.
I need to make sure that, even like you say, even if I feel like it could go either way in terms of what I'm saying could be looked at as right or wrong from different parties, but at least I've tried, like you said, tried to be fair about it, I think.
Mhm.
Kind of try to take as much of the sort of my personal emotion out of it, of or my personal bias, actually, because I feel like there's a lot of commentary online where they build these affiliations, and especially as you get bigger, right? This is the thing: as you get bigger, you start getting invited to more events,
Mhm.
and these events can go from just utter, they can go from these smallest things, right, which can go from the smallest things where someone's inviting you to a showroom, and
Yeah.
actually they could be really small, but it's great because you're seeing someone in the process of their work, and no matter the quality of the work, the passion comes through,
Of
and that's
course.
all you want, because it's like none of this is a sort of an objective or subjective science, right? So seeing that passion and seeing someone kind of go through the process of that blood, sweat, and tears is always great, and that could be a small thing. But the
Yeah.
bigger things are the fashion shows, right? Probably, or even beyond that, whatever, Vogue events or whatever you get invited, those kind of things. And when you're doing stuff to kind of, and when you start getting invited to those things, that's the moment where you have this kind of crossroads reckoning moment. Um, and it becomes something, I think it becomes something completely different. You're not just a content creator. In fact, you're not even a content creator anymore. I think you're almost become a little, depending on how you deal with these kind of invites and that kind of the love that you get from certain people, and you almost become a conduit for the brands a little bit.
Mm.
And I think I realized that for the first time when I went this time, because I've been invited in the past to Paris and to Milan and these sort of things, but this was the first time where I was going kind of to the official schedule for proper events that were like, I didn't have to send an email to anyone to say, "Would you invite?" You know what I mean? It was like
Yeah.
I was reached out
It
to.
was like a level up, you know, you're like, "Oh,
Yeah, I
I'm."
was reached out to, and in a surprising way. And as well, it was sort of like, well, these people obviously follow me,
Yeah.
because it's not like I'd had a sort of like I'd been showing up those brands on my stories, for example. So
Mhm.
they thought, oh, let's bring him in, because it was just random people thinking, oh, we like your stuff. So you
Yeah.
almost sort of like, you go to the shows and you kind of like, this is the first moment where, and I had this last year, but as I say, I wasn't recording and I had about 200 followers, so a different story. But
Mhm.
this is the first time where I thought, the minute I take my camera and film this, and if I decide to put it up as a post or a reel or a story or whatever,
Yeah,
I've then I'm then a branch of the marketing kind of arm, I guess.
totally.
And so I decided I'm not going to do that. And whether that means going forward, that has some sort of repercussions in terms of like whether you're invited to things or not or whatever.
Yeah.
But I kind of just decided at that time, like I don't care,
Okay.
and yeah, and that gives me a freedom in terms of what I talk about for sure.
Yeah. So that's like if you're choosing to like show like, hey, I'm at this show, like you're like vouching for them essentially and like being a part.
Yeah, it's vouching for them, but it's also showing, and I think a lot of people want escapism, right?
Mhm.
But I don't know if I want it, and I don't think a lot of my followers want it because that's not why they follow me. The
Mhm.
people are not following me for escape. They're not following me for outfits
Yeah.
and me to kind of do all that stuff because I barely do that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I just felt, well, even if I showed you that part, if I showed the audience that specific part, I don't think it's a fair representation of what happens. Because I
Yeah.
spoke about, you might have seen this video, I spoke about one of the shows that I went to at the end of Fashion Week,
Yeah.
where I saw homeless people being moved around.
Yes.
And to me, that was far more interesting than the show
Yeah.
because for many reasons, right? I see now
Oh,
you
for
get
sure.
that, you
Yeah.
get that, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, I get that.
but there'll be other audiences of other content creators who have a smaller, larger, whatever, people who have a reach, who just wouldn't want to even know that. They wouldn't want to confront that. And
Yeah.
I have it two ways. I think people have created, it's almost like farming an audience,
Yeah.
but you're not, the audience is basically kind of spun around your finger almost because they're basically sold a dream.
Yeah.
And then everyone who watches those things then kind of thinks, well, if I do that, then maybe I can have that.
Hmm.
And then you kind of thinking to yourself, well, okay, so if I go to this show and homeless people are being moved around and we're all waiting outside, it doesn't start on time ever.
Yeah.
You get in and it's going to sound like first world problems. Oh, you've been invited, Nick, to this event and it doesn't start on time. Yeah, because if I don't see my patients on time,
Hmm.
then my patients have other things to do. Like, so I come from a background where like a patient's time is important. If they've come to me to see me for a medical issue or whatever it is,
Yeah.
then I better stick to that time. I've got to work my schedule around it. You see what I mean?
Of course.
And so I'm come from that sort of thing. So if the build up is not right, you're literally going in and you have about 7 minutes of runway,
Yeah.
right? And you can't, and you don't realize that you go there, you can't see the looks necessarily as well as you thought you could anyway. Because sometimes the lighting's crap, or the runway, there's too much of a gap, or everyone's got their phones out, or whatever it is, right? So you kind of, and my idea, one of the ideas when I started with this was it would be nice to go up and close a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I never thought, okay, within a year I might be able to do some of these things to a certain extent, but I thought maybe that would kind of open my eyes to something that I can't see on an app scrolling through photos.
Yeah.
The two-dimensional space, the three-dimensional space will surely sort of change my mind. And
Mhm.
I think the minute that you kind of realize that it's not really that's such a small part of it,
Yeah.
right? So if I went to sort of 8 shows between Milan and Paris, you're probably talking about just over an hour's worth of runway.
Hmm.
So an hour's worth of runway, maybe about 16 to 20 hours of faff around it.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time, kind of like watching your bank account would go down, like because you got to eat, and
Yeah.
and you could very, and I said this as well, you could very well, sometimes the brands will say, oh, like we'll cover this bit, or we'll give, again, that's a choice that you make as an individual,
Mhm.
and it wasn't something that I wanted to do.
Okay.
Like the minute like I take anything from a brand, it's again like
Yeah.
someone's gonna find out somewhere, and if not, I'm gonna know that I took this from this brand. And so on the one hand, I'm kind of outwardly critical about it. At the same time, I took their money and their hospitality and all this sort of stuff. It just doesn't sit well.
Yeah. So you don't want
Um,
to be like bought essentially.
yeah, but that's why I'm lucky, because people ask me all the time, "Would you do this full time?" And I don't know why. I don't know why it's such a commonly asked question. Like people want to sort of like
Well, it's the
almost
dream for a lot of people to be like,
yeah, yeah,
"Oh,
and it's all yeah, and it's all yeah, and I think the minute you say no, I'm good, I'm quite good, like there are opportunities. No, I think it's very definitely feels like an industry that I felt like in the first place, but it definitely feels like an industry that even though it's fast moving, things stay the same in that it is for a younger generation all the time.
Mhm.
Like, and I guess one thing that I would say that's changed is, I guess when I was growing up and when I was a teenager, all the inspiration was from sort of movies and from magazines and that sort of stuff, right? And the fact that people were not taking that sort of inspiration that used to kind of last for months before it used to change and something else would come in. The fact that that's not happening now, um, and it's all just in the youth and whoever just kind of making a decision, and then things change, and this whole thing of like micro trends and all that kind of stuff, even that I guess is slowing down, but you can kind of see that it really is a certain age group that's calling all the shots in terms of what goes forward, and who are the people who will be at the shows, and who are the kind of the influencers who are making money for the brands, and all these sort of things, like the K-pop influence and all these kind of different bits and pieces.
Yeah.
um and you kind of realize, like, if you're going to do that full time, you almost need a guarantee to know that you're going to get paid, and to do this day in day out. But yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, this kind of like goes into a lot of conversations about like how do you feel about content creators and people on social media kind of becoming more of like the audience like of Fashion Week and like other people that are talking about fashion on social media. Like how do you feel about all those things?
I kind of hate it. I kind of hate it because, um and again, this is it's very and what's it, kind of like an antithesis, I guess is the word I'm looking for, of what you should feel, I guess.
Uh-huh.
But I think this whole thing of an influencer being stopped in the street because someone's such a fan of them, it's just so bizarre to me.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, and again, it wasn't until the last couple of months where, and don't get me wrong, for myself, and thankfully, I mean, the people who I've seen, I'm not going to say all my followers, but the people who I've seen who've come up to me have been lovely people, and they haven't tried to do any weird stuff or whatever, right?
Mhm.
But it's still, like, I've had lecturers who lecture on fashion come up to me in the street. And I
Mm.
just think, well, I'm just a random guy. Do you know what I mean? I'm just a,
Yeah.
so it's a little bit of like I guess the sort of it's basically a minor league celebrity in a way.
Mhm.
And I guess the issue that I have with it is that I need you to push back against me. Because the reason I do this is because I want to have a conversation.
Mhm.
So as much as I enjoy if someone comes to me or says, all this kind of thing of like what you're doing and all this, it's great. But at the same time, I never want to feel like I'm in my comfort zone. I did an interview about a month ago for an Australian mag, and they were asking me sort of like, how do you, it was really specific about how do I sort of monitor how something's doing in terms of, if I put a reel out, how do I know if it's doing well or whatever. And I said, there's a rare occasion, probably once a month or something like that, where at the start I'll put a reel out. And at the start, even though I'm at work, so I'll put the reel out and I'll be at work. It'll be roughly around the same time, and I'll leave work, but the
Mhm.
followers will be down. And I'll be like, that's fantastic. Because
Yeah.
I know, like, the ones where it just sort of like, just it slowly does its thing a bit. There's different things, but
Mm.
the ones where I feel like, oh, great, I've hit a nerve. And I know that I've not said anything sort of like, I've not said anything that's rage baity or clickbaity, right? So I know it's just what I've done in that situation, even if someone's unfollowed, is I've left something in their mind. And
Yeah.
it's great. Like, they don't need to follow me for them to take something out of that and use it in their lives. Because that's all I wanted. Now, ideally, I wanted that conversation out in public, but we all want things, we all want the sort of 3,000 comments and we're all chatting together. But I realized after a while, I can't reply to all these comments anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So, like, at a certain point, it's like, you can't have the conversation anyway, because it's just impossible if, at a certain point. So, yes, I think the, yeah, I think it's strange. There's one of my fellow content creators, Hanan, I Deserve Couture, and I love him. I've got to know him really, really well over the last couple of years. And I remember the last couple of weeks ago, one of the designers put up a story like, you got to follow this guy and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And as much as, so he's taken me on under my wing every time I've seen him, and we've got to know each other. But I always find it a kind of that boundary, right? That boundary of, as soon as a designer acknowledges you, you've got it as an individual. Like, for me, are they genuinely, do they enjoy my enthusiasm? Do they enjoy my criticism? Is
Mhm.
it because I've been positive about them? Because it's such it's such a thin line. And I thought, as much as I think it's great on an individual level to get that attention from someone who's in the industry,
Mhm.
it's always something that, as we go on in the next months and years, I think designers are more and more wary that they have to come and try and reach out and almost sort of pacify and kind of talk to people who they wouldn't have talked to us in the past. Like, I have some designers in my followers who are just, as soon as I put a story out, because as soon as I put a reel out, they've seen the bloody thing,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't say anything publicly until I started having the sort of the bigger follower number. And then what would happen is they would maybe invite me to their shows. And then maybe I would show, even if I wasn't completely sort of happy about the whole sort of collection, maybe if I was showing off one dress or one situation or one celeb. And then after that, maybe they would post about me.
Yeah.
And I can kind of see the vision for that cycle. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? You can kind of see
Yeah.
where the
It's
sort of
like, I'll help you, you help me, and then you're like,
yeah, where does the conveyor belt take me? And I
mhm,
think that happens to all of us when we do this, because
yeah.
I think this is still a niche subject. Luxury fashion is niche.
Mhm.
And you could probably count in sort of in the dozens how many of us who actually talk about this day in, day out.
Yeah.
And the thing is, as well, is you automatically get a leg up if you speak it in English, right? You get more attention, which is, again, it's this natural bias, right? So again, you can narrow it down even further.
Mhm.
So automatically, when there's so few of you doing it who are getting, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of views, when there's so few of you doing it, it's natural to attract some of these people anyway. If they're online, it's natural to attract these people anyway.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it does become this conveyor belt of, right, so you have a voice right now, but I think the industry knows how to not how to silence you, but I guess they would call it reward you. Is
Mhm.
probably how they would call it. Reward you for what you've been putting in. And I don't know. And again, I'm very fortunate that I don't need to be rewarded,
Yeah.
or I don't care for being rewarded, maybe, I guess. But I think even then, though, I always think, well, what if I got a letter in the post from Chanel,
Yeah.
right, to come to a show, like what am I, friggin', I love some of those Lagerfeld shows,
Mhm.
right? So you know what I mean. So it's always that, and you kind of always balancing that as a creator. But I think a lot of these creators now are basically a level of celeb
Yeah, I
in
was
those
just
in
gonna
those in
say,
those environments, though. In those
yeah,
environments, like if
yeah,
if they if any of us were going to Paris or Milan outside of Fashion Week, like I said, I was approached quite a few times, but outside of Paris Fashion Week or Milan or in
yeah,
London, most of the time, people genuinely don't care about this stuff, so
yeah.
you're not likely to get approached.
I know when I talk to my non-fashion friends, I'm like just like naming like all these models, Instagram people, whatever, and they're like, "Who the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah,
But it's very weird because I've seen a lot of people grow in the last like couple years, and it's like, I work in the garment district, and the Calvin Klein show was across the street from my job,
this is
and
what we spoke about. One of the first conversations we had, right? We
yeah,
kind of,
yeah.
because you were saying, yeah, because you mentioned about, yes, God, carry on anyway. But I know
Well,
you mentioned to me,
it was just like so random to be like working and in the midst of it. And then there's Anna Wintour, and then it's like, like La Roche, and then it's like all the Instagram people, and like people
yeah,
are on the street like screaming for them, like just as much as like Anna or something. Like it was
yeah,
like really, really crazy. I mean, on my lunch break, I made sure I like crossed the street to like get
yeah,
my photograph where all the
yeah,
photos. They were probably
yeah,
like,
yeah.
who's this girl? We don't know who she is. Let's take her photo.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was
Emily
like, this is
Ratajkowski or whoever it was. Yeah.
yeah.
No,
So
you know what? It was really interesting at that time because I remember another. I mean, I hate using the word influencer or whatever, but however you want to call it. But someone else who's basically a peer, and
mhm,
she was invited to that show, and I remember she messaged me literally. I think she might have still been at the end of the show,
mhm,
and because I'd put up a story saying something along the because it was a new launch, new director,
mhm,
and it was kind of my view was sort of a bit confused as to, yes, Calvin Klein has this sort of ego where they feel like they still need to do this stuff, but this is not what they sell. They sell friggin' underwear and jeans, right? So
mhm,
who are we kidding here, right? And
totally.
so I think she felt a little bit. So she messaged me, and we get on really well. But she messaged me just saying, kind of like, I kind of saw what they were coming from and all this kind of stuff. And then I said to her, I kind of think it might have been in the moment though. Like, to be fair, like if I was in the moment, maybe I would have felt the same way as well. But
Yeah,
watching it as a sort of non-participating sort of actor in this whole thing. It just looked like a safe kind of workwear that I've seen millions of times. Like
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily. And look, and I'm not trying to judge someone on their first, all that kind of thing. But at the same time, I just want to, as I see it, doesn't mean this person can't succeed going forward, and their maybe their vision's being compromised. All these other things that could
No,
contribute
there's
to
so
someone not
much to
having a,
it.
yeah, all these in contributing factors. But as I see it, this is what I feel. But you could tell though, like she'd been invited there.
Mhm.
She'd had all that sort of whatever it was that built up to it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, the fashion industry is really good at doing that.
Yeah, no, that's what I was gonna say is, like, it's really it's the whole influencer thing is new, but how fashion picks people and prioritizes people and, like, spotlights people is not new at all. Like, it's always these people that get, like, chosen,
Yeah,
and I think, like, the influencer is just, like, the new version of that.
but it's just it's the same on Instagram and TikTok and that sort of thing. In that how an account is blown up.
Mhm.
I remember I was talking to someone who kind of worked for Meta, and they were telling me just sort of recently, and I said, the follower thing, it becomes this myth of like, and it only becomes a myth because you think, well, it tends to be for certain PR people, that seems to be the be all and end all, right? So they won't go into the vids and see like how many people have actually seen the bloody thing,
Yeah.
right? Or how many people have liked it or commented or what, they won't look at. So I was saying, well, so how does this work, right? And so I was told actually, once people follow you, most of the time when you post a reel, your followers are not going to be the people who see it.
Hmm.
It's going to be the people who don't follow you,
Okay.
right? And that will depend on how engaging it is to them. So I said, well, when my stuff was blowing up and it went sort of, and then it doubled and tripled, these people were not followers. And so they became followers because it came up to the top of their feed or. And so I was then told, well, what people have to do now is they have to click on a link to say, I want to see the reels only from the people who I'm following, not other stuff that could
Mhm.
be something that you like.
Yeah.
Right. So I said, right. Okay. So now this makes sense why my regular followers are not sharing my reels as much as some random people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it kind of makes it so you're kind of like, well, actually, it kind of gives you an idea of how all of this is working, and then it makes you think, well, how do things blow up?
Yeah.
Because if you have a certain reel with a certain amount of views and likes, and it ticks all the boxes, and it's not some sort of mean 5-second thing or whatever, it's actually something where you feel like you're saying something and people are kind of interested in what you're saying. So how does that sort of engage people? Like how does that work for one person and not another person? And it just kind of when you hear how that all works and how kind of the random nature of it, and basically a lot of it comes down to, I guess, if you're, I was told like if you're female and you dress a certain way, then you're more likely to capture the follower than if you're male and you're kind of, this sort of thing. I thought, oh wow, it's fascinating, right? So
It's like
literally that it's that split second decision of how someone decides to do it or not. And I mean, at this point in time, I don't particularly care. But I always thought if that's the only way that I get access to go to things and be a part of the kind of fashion that I'm interested in, which happens to be luxury fashion, which happens to be really sort of like a club mentality, right? I
mhm.
mean, the rows are being reduced every season.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're a bloody journalist, you can't get it. Like a journalist for years, and some of the journalists who I know who can't really get in these days, and the ones who can are the ones who basically will never say anything even remotely negative about anything, right,
Mhm.
from the major publications. So yeah, I find all of that just from the fashion side, like we were just saying, but even just the sort of the algorithm side of how do you blow up to a certain extent. I find it really strange.
Do you think it's harder now?
I think it's harder for like yeah, I do think it is because I think now all my vids that do, and again, this is so like subjective because I'll say all my vids that do well, like even my worst ones do well, would be really good for a lot of people who've got triple the followers than I have. So I've
Yeah.
got to be fair about that. But so I can't be sort of too sort of egoistic about it and just be like, oh, it's not doing well enough. But even the ones that do whatever my view of well is, they feel like they're slow burners, and sometimes people come back to them, and a lot of it comes down to if a big account finds the vid
Mhm.
somehow and they share it,
Mhm.
then it might become a big vid. So I did a vid on the fact that India Fashion Week was not
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do blame the algorithm when they start. Like the algorithm at the start will, if you have something interesting to say, it will pick you up. I genuinely feel that,
I agree with
because I
that.
think a lot of people worry about the hashtags. If you've got something, if you say it without sort of too many gaps and it's, stuttering, and because mine's not that production wise that interesting, right? It's just a change of photos. But if you can say it in a way that's engaging and almost feels like a way a politician would speak to on a mic, and
Mhm.
I guess you've got to have those sort of oratory skills, maybe. But if you can do that, you can obviously build.
Yeah.
Like I kid you not, I've been excited 2 times since I've done this for the last year. So
Mhm.
I was excited when I hit 1,000 followers. I was like, "Ooh,
Okay.
1,000 followers, right?"
I love that.
And I was also excited the first time I had a million view video, which was like shit, like wow, okay. But there've been so many other milestones since that people would be happy just to have one, but they haven't felt anything because and I think because of the system and how it's supposed to reward and all this kind of thing. There's a video gamification of it where
Mhm.
it feels like the milestones at a certain point become milestones for the sake of milestones.
Mhm.
That's the thing. It boils down to this, right? I think it boils down to this. This is the takeaway message. I think all of us are looking for friends,
Of
right?
course.
All of us are looking for the connections that we maybe had when social media wasn't such a big part of our lives, right? And
Mhm.
a lot of those people have either, I know in my case, right? A lot of those people have got married, have kids, have families. And I found that life that they were portraying to me in those WhatsApp groups to be boring, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like, I don't want to see pictures of your kids all the time,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
So I got out of those groups because I couldn't, it just wasn't where I was at. And it's not where I'm at mentally in terms of having the conversations.
Totally.
So if you want the conversations now, the best way to actually meet people is to kind of give yourself a presence and then go to the events and all that kind of stuff. But what
Yeah.
you want from that,
You're,
what
like,
you want
creating
from
my,
that,
like, hack. This is my hack with the
yeah.
podcast, with the Blossom Night.
But what you want though, Claire, out of the million views or whatever, is you want then to go to an event where there's 500 people,
Mhm.
exchange details with 50 of those, and become really good friends with 2 of them. So
Yeah.
what you want out of all of this is 2 good friends,
I
is
know.
what I've learned. Is what I've
That's
learned.
so funny.
It's
I'm
mad.
like
It's mad. I think that's what I want. I just
you're like,
want,
"I did this all for these 2 friends."
yeah, I want conversation because I realized as well, because again, this was naivety from my part.
Yeah.
I thought, God forbid, if I go to these really cool fashion events, which are really exclusive, and you've got to really know your fashion, and you've got to be invited for that reason. I
Mhm.
thought the conversation is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
The conversation was crap,
Ugh,
and it was so demoralizing. It was soul sucking because it was
I hear this all
like
the
who are these people, like and the people you meet,
time.
and this is really bizarre, but the people who are in front of the screen are not the same people in person. And I don't mean that in terms of like, are they bitchy? They're not confident like they are on screen. You think, well, I was attracted to who you portrayed.
Yeah.
Like I thought this was an extension of you, because it's an extension of me. I'm the same person. And this was a little bit of sort of when I meet certain influencers or celebrities that I've done over probably the last 6 months or so, where I meet them and it's really strange because I meet them and it's like you shouldn't be meeting them, but I don't get starstruck or anything like that. But I'll
Mhm.
just talk to anyone like I would if I'm doing a reel, because that's just my personality. And I just thought that would be not everyone, but I thought that would be the majority of the case. And it'd almost be like everyone's on drugs, but they're not on drugs because that's their personality. But they
Yeah.
could back it up because they could talk about fashion, but they could talk about a little bit of, some films they've seen or music or maybe an art gallery they've been to.
Mhm.
Because especially if a lot of these designers, like we talk about JW Anderson, for example, if a lot of these designers use art as in sort of physical art, so use paintings and all this, if they use that as inspirations for a lot of the collections, then why do none of the influencers who are on a big scale know anything about art?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like even just basic stuff, just like even like what you think you'd learn in third grade as 11-year-old about Starry Night or something like that, or just
Yeah.
just something simple beyond the Mona Lisa.
Yeah. Or,
Do
like,
you know what I mean?
even,
And you,
like, really fashion and fabric or detail or something, like,
yeah,
it's
and
well
and I think what happens is, for example, so when I was starting this, I love Haute La Mode, Luke from Haute La Mode, right?
Mhm.
When he was doing his, because at the start he would talk about, he would be in his room and he'd have all his books behind him and he would talk about sort of different fabrics, and he would talk, and it'd be a really sort of sort of calming presence on a YouTube channel. So you'd feel like watching him kind of go through all this stuff. And now, and again, like this is not me judging him because he has to make a living. He has to, whatever it is, he has his audience. Well, but now it's just all red carpet reviews.
Yeah.
I was like, that's like, surely, like, are you just doing it for those people now?
Yeah.
Because if you're just talking about sort of the MTV Awards, I don't know, the Swedish MTV Awards specifically, you know what I mean? So basically, people just want the same stuff, and you're just giving it to them.
Yeah.
Like, when did you stop doing it for you?
Mhm.
Or is this who you are now? Is this what you enjoy? Because I know that person, and maybe this is just my sort of like, this is just you as a sort of a viewer saying, this is what I want, but
Mhm.
this is what you started with.
Yeah.
This is what you start, like, no one knew your face. And this comes to all content creators. No one knew your face. So you started, everyone starts to do stuff that they're interested in. And so the minute you start tailoring everything to an audience or something that you know is like easily consumable and people will continue to watch it, it's like, where did all the other stuff go?
Yeah.
Like you had something interesting there.
Yeah, it's kind of like, people start being like, they start seeing like the money or the fame, I think that's kind of like just a classic, like selling out, experience. But,
Yeah.
it's like where you kind of alter who you are. But it's interesting talking about this because, a lot of the people who do listen to this podcast, like haven't even gotten to that point, but like potentially like want to get there. And I think it's like
Yeah.
a valuable note to like, at least for me, because like I grew up being in like the punk scene. Like Vivian Westwood was like my girl. I
Yeah.
was in punk bands, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm
Yeah.
always like, let's get to the like meat of it, and I think a lot of younger people kind of also want that like authenticness. And it is like a little sad to realize that, like, fashion, even in these ways, it is a big business. And so it's like
Yeah.
artistic, but like money. So there's a lot of like, how do you fit in and
And
be?
it feels more money than it does art at the moment. To me, it does anyway.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, and it feels like easy pickings for me, where I can just sort of keep. It's one of those sort of easy things for me, just like someone talking about a red carpet, where I can just keep saying, "But what was the decision making behind this?"
Hmm.
Like, you may like this, so if you're someone passing on the information to an audience, you like this dress, you like this, but why did they decide to go in this direction?
Hmm.
And I find so many times out of 10, it's because my guess is a lot of the time it's happened in a boardroom.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like,
I mean, I
like,
work.
I think of a recent example. I think of the Bauman example, where Olivier was doing all of the stuff that he was doing up to this point, which is quite coded in the Bauman language, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden it became this sort of quiet, sort of not quite. I don't want to use it. I use quiet
Uh,
luxury as a sort of a almost as a sort of a joke, really. That's kind of why
yeah.
I call myself
We all
that.
like
But
know that like idea, of, like,
yeah, we know
and
that idea, and I think I think it was presented as sort of like a. I think someone said to me in the comments, actually, it's a kind of a throwback to, I think, a 70s period where this is what was being played with and this sort of thing. And I said, anything can be attributed to anything when you start doing references,
yeah.
because designers do it all the time. They use it as a sort of like a fallback to explain sometimes why they make a decision that people are not kind of. I was doing this, it was this 1950s collection, it was like a throwback. And it's just sort of like, but why the 180 though? And why did we not see anything up until this point that suggest, like, normally you'd see some threads of a
Yeah.
couple of looks here or there that were suggestive of this was how your ideas were moving. And because of the readings that you were doing, the kind of content that you were consuming over the last 6 months, a year or so, that was the direction you were moving in. If it's just like that, and you expect the audience to be like, oh yeah, it's because he was taking, no, your audience is built in already. And this is what Gucci does. Gucci just kind of 80s all the time, right, nowadays. And you've got, I think brands take their audiences for granted in that they think they'll just flip flop based on whatever someone says. And I
Yeah.
think I think the influencers used to just kind of rely on that as well. So they would just be like, oh yeah, this is brilliant, and what a bold reimagination and all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, they're saying all this stuff. They're getting the views, the likes, and all this kind of stuff. But in the real world, no one's buying the stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like, if there's no purpose, if you're not going to see it out and about, and it's just going to be in a warehouse and it's eventually going to get discounted or whatever, it's going to go through the outnet or all these other places, it's going to go through the back channels of getting to someone in one way or another. Then all this that was sort of art and genius and all these sort of hyperbolic terms that we want to throw out, all of that stuff that was only 9 months ago, we were saying these kind of things about this stuff, but is now in outlets at discounted rates. What's the difference here? Is it just that do you know what I mean?
Like
Why are
what's
we not coming back to those things that we call genius? And this is me talking about all these influencers in a way.
Mhm.
All these things that we said that you're telling people actually, because you're influencing people and telling people actually this is good,
Yeah.
and maybe giving someone an idea actually I should save as a member of this bloated middle class, I should save up my money to buy this. But if no one's caring in 9 months' time,
Yeah.
why are we not revisiting and why are we not talking about it?
I know, and especially when it had, like, no DNA of, like, anything that you're like, "Oh, like, this is that blazer, but it has that spin on it or has that thing," and it just kind of felt like a little, like, blank, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like, there is, like, such an interesting point that, like, you say, like, about fashion and that people who consume fashion content don't really think about is like the back end. It's like the production. It is the people that are shelling out the money to wear this. It is like the massive amounts of brands that are going to knock off
Oh,
whatever is down the runway, and it's like I almost feel like with money getting involved with like these higher brands and the creatives, it's like it's not actually like they should be doing like the high art, the inspiration, like drawing in all this creativity so that we do have new, not like the opposite of like up here, like looking at what's going on down here and then just reconstructing it in an elevated version, like
yeah.
because it's all
But
gonna
I
get
think
cycled through.
but I think my issue is that I don't expect. So I've always looked at fashion in a different way to I don't call fashion an art personally. I
Mhm.
call it an art form, but not art because I feel like fashion is cyclical in a way that movies, for example, aren't, or music, for example, isn't. Because I think those fields, for example, are still breaking new ground. Now you might have to go out and find it, right? Just in a way that you might have to kind of find some of these ideas in fashion. But if you try and find it in music or film, you can find it. And not only can you find it, it'll be put up on a pedestal by some of those sort of festivals that are made to do it, right? In fashion, those people who are doing things that are not only groundbreaking, but also groundbreaking, but grounded in those principles of tailoring, wearability, all these sort of things where like the idea of what this whole thing of like what a woman wants to wear, right? This whole thing, it's been, and because there are so few female designers, and you have the kind of the Vaccarello, Anthony Vaccarellos of the world, and Pieter Mulier, and all, everything becomes this sort of this race to abstraction because it's almost like we need to keep breaking ground. And the way we break ground is by structure and form and all this kind of stuff. And then the more people look at it and think, but I can't wear this.
Yeah.
And then if you go all the way to the other way, then it's like, where's the imagination?
Yeah, of
And so
course.
fashion has always worked well when both work in harmony.
Of course.
And I think in the last few years it's struggled as to sort of like, and you obviously get some brands that kind of they know their aesthetic and they build up their base, but they're obviously working from a lower kind of financial perspective and all this kind of stuff. But generally fashion's kind of been bouncing between sort of like how do we do the imagination but how do we do it wearable, and kind of this mixture of stuff. Because the people that I get I don't get much feedback on when I talk about the stuff that's really avant-garde and out there, even though it's sort of, I guess, people find it in the moment quite visually maybe exciting or out there. It's more of a sugar than it is a honey. So you
Mhm.
don't get that sort of follow up of like, oh, where did you see that from? I was really interested in this idea. Where can I come? It kind of just becomes this like sort of quick sweet that people forget about. And I find that really interesting compared to, and then when I talk about things that are just sort of like the row or Loro Piano or that kind of stuff, then that kind of stuff just feels almost like it doesn't engage enough, but it's actually the stuff, it's the kind of thing that actually young millennials and kind of older Gen Z are more interested in, but they're only interested in the brands who've told an authentic story for years. I guess any of the newcomers in it are kind of not interesting to a lot of people.
Mhm. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Why do you think? Because it is like, I mean, I feel like with the younger people, it's very like there's like a fashion race to like know as much as you can and have as much archive, and like at least in New York, there's like this whole thing going on and
New York is too much.
it's a lot. And I'm
New
older,
York's too much.
so I
I,
feel
I see. I don't know. It'd be interesting. We're specifically to New York, right? And I feel this about Berlin as well. I feel like New York has gone down such a hole,
Mhm.
and I don't I don't know if this is, again, this is someone who doesn't know New York enough. Well, the fashion scene. I know about brands, but I don't know the sort of like the kind of the cogs behind it all.
Okay.
It it feels to me as a sort of a fashion week, as a sort of a curator of ideas and brands. It feels so insecure to me.
How
It
so?
feels and I tell you how. It feels like it feels really costumey, and I see that in the street all the time. Like when I look at street fashion in New York, I feel like,
It's crazy.
how do you even leave the house sometimes? Because it just feels like everyone is trying to one up each other. Like
Yeah.
everyone looks bloody great who you see in these photos, right?
Yeah.
But it's like in London, I can go out in a tees and a sweat
Mhm.
in central London, and no one's going to sort of be like, "Oh, what are you wearing?" And
Mhm.
it feels like there's certain areas of New York where sort of like our Shoreditch, for example, compared to Soho, and it just feels like if you're not doing all these layers and these explosions of color and accessorizing and doing all this stuff, like you can't even be in fashion at all. You can't even be into fashion. It feels really bizarre to me.
I literally was gonna make a video on this because first off, like background, I like work in fashion. I've been in here for 4 years. Like I don't make a lot of money, you know? And so I see all these like kids like with all this like Rick and da da da. And I'm like, I want to make fashion content, but I'm like using, maybe some helmet Lang I got from the thrift store. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
and I literally like had this thought where I was like, I don't have like access to any of this stuff like currently. Like if I were to even make fashion content, even if like let's say I found this Gap cardigan that's like very similar to like a Margiela piece or something. You know what I mean? I'm like,
yeah,
will
yeah,
people even find that interesting? Or because it feels like if you don't have like the chrome heart or like the Rick Zip hoodie or like I don't even know. It's all like chrome hearts and Rick Owens over here. But
yeah,
it's like it's weird because it feels like you can't even be a part of the game. And I've been feeling like a little bit of like an outsider as someone who like works in fashion and does
yeah,
fashion
yeah,
events for like it's actually been hard to get like legit people to come to events because they're not actually interested in growing and or helping the fashion community. It's like internet fashion. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
no, it's
And
very
internet fashion as well. It's something you have to be. It was something I think when I started to kind of go to events and get involved, and this was before I started doing all this stuff. Actually, kind of not coincidentally, actually, because I think a lot of it is because I probably pissed off too many people. Actually,
good for you.
but but when I used to do all that, I was literally, because I was earning through my job,
Mhm.
I would just be buying new outfits, but then I wouldn't be wearing the stuff again. And it was, for me, it was like, yeah, fine, I can afford to do it. It's fine. And then at a certain point, I thought, even though I can afford to do it, theoretically, even though I'd rather just go on holidays and do other things,
Yeah.
even though I can afford it, I'm just not going to do it. And
Mhm.
I think the thing with internet fashion is I have a feeling a lot of the stuff, if it's not thrifted, and I presume a lot of it is thrifted or Depop or Vinted or whatever, I just see so many Gen Z. They'll just wear stuff with tags on.
Mm.
They'll just wear stuff with tags on and they'll return them. It's friggin' nasty,
That's
but I
crazy.
see it all the time. So I'm just
I
going to call
haven't
it out.
noticed it, but I haven't been looking, so but it kind of like it's like that fakeness of, like, fashion that's like, if I were to go around, like, Soho, like, today, it's like
Yeah,
everyone's out on the street, everyone's, like, asking about your fit, and it's like, I love the interest in fashion, but I've noticed, like, I was at FIT, like, during the pandemic, and then
yeah,
post-pandemic was when all that, like, interest started happening and, like, TikTok and everything, and I was like, what world like people were walking around being like describe your fit, and I was like what the fuck, like I'm like 30, I was like 20, I don't even know, I was like 31 when I was graduating, so I was
yeah, yeah,
like girl what,
yeah,
but now I'm like I'm the girl backstage like tell me about your fit, no I'm just kidding. I'm not like
yeah.
that, but yeah,
No, I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean.
it was just different. And so
Yeah,
it's like it's weird navigating it sometimes because it has gotten so extreme. Like I come from the music background where like, the like male, like cool guy creator of taste and that scene was like knew everything about every single record, every single band. You didn't know this, you're an idiot, da 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 da. And
Yeah.
like it's very similar vibe with like fashion or like certain brands or whatever. So it's very like weird to see the same hyperfixation on fashion as I experienced in music, you know? And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, it's just young boys being, you know, like young boys, I guess, like want to one up each other with their knowledge of whatever niche fashion thing that or whatever niche knowledge that they are all trying to
Yeah,
acquire.
and this is the thing, like you could get really sort of angry about the sort of the influencer angle, right? And the people who are being positive all the time and all. But at the same time, you have those pockets of like the sort of you have those sort of click kind of groups as well who are just sort of like whatever, the Demna boys or the Eddie Slimane boys or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think those kind of I think it just exists it exists everywhere,
Yeah.
and I think it comes down to I think it does come down to how social media has played us. And look, we'll see what happens to TikTok, I guess, in the next few months. And I presume it'll keep getting kicked down the can, every 6 months or whatever. But I do think it comes down to this thing of people are desperate to be seen. I
Yeah.
guess that's one of the things of like I said, I'm a bit further down. But if anyone who's going to watch this or listen to this or whatever, who's kind of starting on this,
Mhm.
because you always get asked like what's your advice, and
Mhm.
the advice always has to be do it for yourself, like do it like you can't have I mean some people will have these goals and they will do anything to create the goal, but when you do that you have to realize that you'll probably end up creating content that won't be you, because you're going to have to appeal to masses to do
Yeah.
that, to grow that way,
Yeah.
right? So if you don't want to be like that, then you've got the only way you can do it is just to be yourself.
Of course.
And now, if you're someone who's not particularly comfortable in front of a camera, or you don't feel like you speak so well, or whatever, or you're not comfortable in, because I have people who don't particularly want to do sort of, especially for women, and again, men don't have this issue, and there's that double standard. But for women, it's like I don't really want to have to do makeup and wear a nice dress and all this kind of stuff when I do my content, right? For it
Mhm.
to grow. And again, that's fair enough. Like you're having to jump through all these hoops just to do it. And
Yeah.
again, I think my case is a very I don't know. I think there's a lot of luck there, and there's a lot of specific time and the niche and the kind of things that I'm talking about kind of has helped me to get to this point. And we don't know where it will go, but I think all of that's helped it. And I think my life experience, like we're not Gen Z age, right? So a lot of people, I think for us, if a lot of my engagement does come with 18 to 24 group,
Mhm.
but I think if a lot of my if this wasn't Instagram or TikTok, if this was a forum somewhere and I was around people my age, talking about those ideas wouldn't seem so new and like, wow, you're coming from a new perspective, because we've had those life experiences. We've done the reading,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of it's sort of like we've been doing this for years. It's just the experiences that we've built and we've learned all this stuff. And when these people get to 30, 40, whatever, they'll have the same stuff. It's just whether the whole growth thing comes down to whether you, as someone who's older and has got these points to say, can somehow interest people who are potentially half your age to watch the
Yeah.
thing, because
Yeah.
that's how you're going to grow. Because like
No.
you say, like if it's older women or for a specific like great for that specific thing, but you might want the people who are online are younger, so you've got to be able to say something that younger people are interested in.
Yeah, that's
But
gonna
how do you do that in a way that's not dumbed down and all that kind of stuff, right? It's not easy.
Yeah, it's a lot of people think it's just like, "Oh, you just do it," you know, and it really does kind of come down to learning how to communicate in an effective way, and, you know, I have this friend, she's, like, a business mentor, and she always says, like, "You can't teach people that are, like, above you, you can only teach people, like, below you," so I think that's, like, an interesting concept of, like, your knowledge is helpful for someone like my knowledge is helpful for someone who, like, wants to get into fashion school, wants to get into the career,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And so it's, like, that's kinda, like, where I always come from when I'm doing, you know, certain things or whatever,
yeah.
but it
And
is.
it's so important as well.
Mhm.
It's so important because people see people like myself or whoever a lot of us who didn't come from fashion background,
Mhm.
right? It's almost like it almost feels like to so many people like it's a shortcut. Like you don't need to do it, because I could go through the fashion schools and all this kind of stuff, and people still might not care about what I have to talk about or what I make or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like it doesn't like there's different ways of going about it, but what you have to understand is what I'm talking about is not anything like what you might be able to talk about, going through those processes, going through those schools, going through those things. Now, that's the thing. And what can't be measured is the points that you have to make about that you learned through those experiences and that you're putting into your videos, putting into your communications, however you do them.
Okay. Yeah.
You like,
That um
dude, we went from London to Milan to Paris, and it was the first time where I had to, because I had so many things going on for all of them. I kind of had to work out. I messed up my flights. I messed up,
yeah.
like I missed what I didn't get to the airport, and even if I got to the airport, I booked the wrong flights, and on the way back I booked the wrong. So all, and then I was thinking, oh my god, so am I at the stage where I need to get an assistant?
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, if I need to get an assistant, then I need to draw up contracts because then they need to run my accounts. And so then it becomes this whole thing where it's not even you anymore. Having to kind of like outsource your personality to someone to kind of to deal with all this stuff. So it's like, I said, yeah, like you have to work, but you have to earn. Because if I'm going to Fashion Week, if I'm going to Milan or Paris, that's 3 or 4 days that I didn't go to work. You're gonna have to work out, all right, I might have to work some extra shifts or something like that. So yeah,
So, I mean, yeah, let's talk about like, accessibility when it comes to luxury fashion. It's obviously
okay,
something that a lot of people want access to, but very few do. And I remember you posted something about like the what's it called? Like the information that you get about the
yeah.
collection. And you said something like that really stuck out to me about how they only really post that or like give that out at the show. They don't really like make that like a widespread thing for some brands.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought that
Yeah.
was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought so. I spoke about having that whole, as much of the experience as you can as someone who watching from home. Like if you're going to watch a live stream, and now some brands do it. So for example, I mentioned, I think I was talking about the Valentino one because I know there was this whole thing about the bathroom setup and all this kind of thing. There was this all like hullabaloo about it.
Mhm.
And I was really fascinated to see if we get the show notes, then I'm really interested. Really interested in how Alessandro was going to not talk his way into it, of kind of explaining of how we came to this. But I was just like, I want to know what the reason is for this, or at least what he thinks the reason is for it.
Mhm.
Because he could think this is the reason, but maybe not particularly kind of with the way it's portrayed and show, it might not translate as well, right?
Mhm.
And I thought, well, I think a lot of us could do with something like that. Like we should all, and I think that was something that Virgil was really good at. And I think when it came to his Louis Vuitton show, you used to get these really thick books, like people would take them away, and it was just sort of, look, we don't need artists to tell us like the sort of the meanings behind the metaphors and all this kind of, we don't need all that. But I think if you can get the journey behind how something's created, then it gives us more chance for more people to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And I think the people who are going to the shows are not talking about it, they're showing it off, but they're not talking about it. So if we, the sort of the social media, or anyone who's not at the shows, if we can talk about it, the more of us who talk about it, long story short, there's going to be some more. It just means that there's more likely to be some interesting discussions on it. So yeah, the access to it is one thing. I don't think necessarily there needs to be more access to the shows themselves. Like I don't think we need more people or more different types of people being able to go to the shows. I actually think a lot of the shows are probably a waste of money, and they put a lot of companies into a financial hole. Now, obviously, if you're talking about sort of 20 specific brands who can afford it, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But I think having access to that and being able to go to those shows is, I, I, I don't know. I think you as an individual are looking for something different than just fashion. I think you are looking for something more to do with exclusivity and um, that kind of, maybe that special feeling that you as an individual have for going to something so sort of widely sought after, right? Like everyone wants to go to,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
something money can't really buy, for certain
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Like everyone wants to go to the Grand Palais when Matthew Blasey opens his first show, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't mean the show's going to be quote unquote good or not, but it's one of those where it will be a moment in kind of recent fashion history, and you want to be around for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you just got to I think you got to be realistic, right? Like, it is a closed off shop. A lot of the people who do well in it do look very similar to each other. It's like, it has to be said, right? It's like people come back to me in comments like, who are you talking about? Like, what do people look like? Or how do they know? It's like, well, you know who they are. If you just
Yeah.
kind of look around, you know who they.
We're about to wrap, so
Yeah. So, I've lost my thought now.
they
Now that
all
the
they
camera
all
just.
look the same, essentially.
Yeah, they all look the same, but I was trying to think what the point I was trying to make in terms of generally. I can't remember.
Like, if you look, like, you'll figure out that they all look I don't know.
Just blabbering.
Yeah, no, it was I have, like, attention I'm bad at recall I forget things too all the time, and I'm like, "What was"
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, it's basically just, like, a lot of people, like, look the same in the same places, and there's, like, less and less access, essentially.
yes. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's it. So it was a point about access. So it's basically you shouldn't sort of punish yourself if you never get to go to an Hermes show. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like, it's not going to happen. Like, I could get to 1 million followers and it'd probably be quite hard, or 500,000, whatever it is,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, and even then, the benefit that I would get because of that would probably have meant that I would have had to sell out on so many other things
Mm,
to create in a way to get that growth.
yeah,
So I think, yeah, the accessibility thing, I think a lot of people who are on the journey, who are starting the journey, don't know the kind of, I guess, the concessions you have to make to get the thing that you wanted.
mm,
And then when you just to do those things, you have to do things that you didn't want to do.
yeah.
Like
It's
you can never just do the things you want to do to get the thing you want. You can't have your cake and eat it.
wow. Yeah, it's definitely, like, what you hear, like, a lot of celebrities talk about, and, like, musicians or whatever, like,
Yeah.
play the game,
But those people who get to go to the actors and the celebrities and the musicians, their talent is in something else. I talked about this in my Florence Pugh video, right?
Mhm,
They're invited because they're amazing. They're the best at what they do. They're best in class.
mhm,
So it's fair that if you're best in class, then you get invited to the stuff that you get invited to.
totally.
Like there shouldn't be any FOMO over that. Again, it just comes down to a lot of it comes down to what your motivation is in this thing. And
Mhm,
I think I have a sort of, for me personally, I have a sort of nothing is ever enough in the sense of like I always want to challenge myself.
mhm.
And so that will always push me sort of, sorry, this is going to keep moving, but
No.
that will kind of always, just to do this, I had to take my one hand off the thing. That will always push me sort of forward, I guess. That will always give me that momentum or that propulsion to say something or to be more risky with my content or with what I say, for example, because I always need to chat. It's that feeling of like always wanting to, I always want to be one step away from just like blowing myself up in the sort of, in the negative sense as well, where
Yeah.
people are just like, oh, he lost me at this point. Brilliant. Right. I love that thing of just kind of being that dangerous